there. All right, are we all set? All right. All right, I'm just going to read this so I can stay on track because we're over time now. The Ragged Mountain Quarry Shelter is located on the east side of Ragged Mountain in Peoples State Forest in Barkhamsted, Connecticut, over the hill that way. The shelter was inhabited prehistorically by Native American people from perhaps as early as the Middle Archaic and well into the late woodland. The artifact assemblage recovered from archaeological digs conducted by William Fowler and other amateur archaeologists include pottery, projectile points, quarry tools, soapstone fragments, and quarry tailings. This and other evidence indicates that the shelter was used for habitation as well as steatite bowl manufacture. The shelter, with its southeastern exposure, is about 75 feet long with an 11-foot overhang. This photo doesn't do it justice because you can stand like right in here. It's really big. It's a great place. From the back wall, the flat portion of the floor extends approximately 20 feet and then slopes down to the forest below. The shelter overhang is created by hard metamorphic ledge with a softer steatite vein running through the shelter floor. The history of site excavation, next slide, sorry. The history of site excavations date back to 1901 when Walter Manchester, a mineral collector, unearthed Native American artifacts while prospecting. According to Fowlers Article, Manchester dug down at least 12 inches through the entire topsoil layer of the shelter floor, unearthing many artifacts. It was not until 1947 that Charles Lyon and Ray Irons came to the shelter and excavated in Manchester's back dirt. After discovering even more artifacts, Irons and Lyon contacted William Fowler, a well-respected Massachusetts amateur archaeologist, to help them with the excavation. Fowler proceeded to dig test pits on the shelter floor where Manchester previously dug and unearthed even more artifacts within a deeper and perhaps earlier stratum. Realizing the importance of this site, Fowler invited Dr. Irving Rouse from the Yale Peabody Museum to help with the excavations. Even though there was a degree of disturbance from Manchester's digging, Fowler encountered a relatively well-stratified site. He was able to identify areas of habitation defined by a dense black layer of soil, a lighter brown layer comprised of quarry tailings, and dark brown disturbed overburden, which was from Manchester's digging. He also identified two different occupations, the early one associated with the quarrying activity and the later one associated with the ceramic sherds. Fowler also uncovered 8 hearths. Based on their provenience, he believed that some of them were associated with the lower steatite occupation, and others closer to the surface were associated with the later ceramic occupation. Unfortunately, carbon-14 dating was not in use until 1955. Consequently, no dates were ever obtained for this site. Manchester's assemblage contained preserved deer bone from the upper occupation and unidentifiable calcine bone from the lower occupation. Next slide, please. According to Fowler, a total of 429 artifacts were recovered, 66 of which were projectile points, mostly made from quartz, quartzite, and a dark gray to greenish chert. The different point types pictured here from Fowler's drawings represent the cultural time periods from perhaps the Middle Archaic through to the late woodland. So my feeling is that there was more to this than upper and lower occupation. There are several occupations. Next slide, please. Lucy, you're going to have to help me on this one. 83 ceramic sherds were recovered from the shelter, 74 which came from Manchester's artifact assemblage. The rest were recovered during Fowler's excavation. The sherds represent 6 different vessels. Most of the sherds came from the topsoil layer. The ceramic assemblage included pottery from the Middle and Late Woodland period. Point Peninsula, rock or dentate, and dentate impressed are indicative of the Middle Woodland, and the Late Woodland types are the incised and Owasco, Castle Creek incised. So these, right, Lucy, are the Middle Woodland things?
Yeah, except the one on the bottom is actually
Owasco?
The incised. No, it's not. I don't know what that is. It's not. It looks like a Bowman's Brook type, but I don't think it's Bowman's Brook up here. But it's an early late woodland. The
Okay.
incised on the bottom with like a chevron like thing.
Okay. Thanks for being here. Slide 5. Yeah, if anybody has any questions or whatever, Lois. The cultural horizon that is of the greatest interest is the one associated with the soapstone quarrying activity that occurred in the black or dark stratum. According to Fowlers Article, it appears that workshops were set up within the shelter where veins of steatite were quarried away, creating the living area or the habitation zone. From there, other workshops occurred in outside areas of the shelter. A variety of vessel types were manufactured, including kettles, storage bowls, drinking cups, plates, and platters. The latter two groups, this quoted, were made from flat granite slabs or steatite schist worked on most edges to form the vessels with lugs at both ends. Next slide, please. 76 end picks of various sizes were made from quartz and quartzite found locally and basalt, which occurs in outcroppings located in Canton and Simsbury. This is basalt. And we'll talk about it later when we get into when we were digging. We were looking for the basalt picks. I was anyway. I don't know if Kenny was, but I was. Many of the quarry sites do contain basalt, and how you know this is basalt is this middle ridge, and this is what you get in the basalts that come up over on Avon Mountain. They're long columns, and they break off in points, and they would utilize the point to the point where it's polished here on the tip. So they did have a basalt one. See, Kenny, they did have a basalt one.
If you say so,
Let's see now. Many of these were grooved for hafting, while others were grooved principally to be held in the hand. Other tools recovered included 3-corner picks, chisels, mauls, next slide please, quarry axes, scrapers, and smaller picks. These tools were made from harder rocks such as, it's a metamorphic gneiss, Gneiss, granitic schists, quartzite, and quartz, most of which could be attained locally. I mean, anybody gardens around this neck of the woods, you put your trowel in and all you come out with are rocks. So the rocks are everywhere. And all these drawings were from Fowler, so he was a great artist. I don't know why they never used photography, but this is all this stuff is in pointillism, is that what you call it? Okay, next slide, please. Ragged Mountain is one of at least 8 soapstone quarry sites located in Connecticut, most of which are located in Litchfield County. The Connecticut quarries are just a small percentage of the steatite quarries located from as far north as Massachusetts and as far south as Alabama and Georgia, all occurring along the eastern flank of the Appalachian Mountain chain. These outcroppings of talc schist are metamorphosed ocean sediments created some 450 million years ago. So there's a line right here, and these are all considered the talc schist. They're all these little outcroppings. And there's one here which is Soapstone Mountain, and one down here is in New Canaan. Next slide, please. Because these sites are rather high profile, they have been subject to looting for decades, leaving an incomplete picture of the prehistoric soapstone quarrying activity for Connecticut. Artifacts from many of these sites are scattered between Connecticut historical societies, museums, and private collections. There are no carbon-14 dates associated with the Connecticut quarry sites either. Not even the 6 quarry sites in Massachusetts and Rhode Island have C14 dates representative of the vessel manufacturing industry. They do have a carbon-14 date for, I think it was the Oak Lawn quarry, which had they had a pipe manufacturing area, and it's chlorite, and they got a date for 720 AD. Next slide, please. Dates obtained for soapstone bowls for Connecticut occur in cremation burial context only. They include feature 1, a carrier in the Connecticut Valley dated at 3550 plus or minus 90 BP from a cremation burial at Tolles Road in southern Connecticut dating 3005 plus or minus 120 BP, and another site, Jean's Motel in western Connecticut, dating to 3045 plus or minus 135 years BP. And the Lieutenant site of the lower Connecticut River Valley contains steatite vessel fragments with a date of about 750 BC. Very little has been published concerning the prehistoric steatite industry in Connecticut. Unfortunately, I learned this the hard way in 1996 while conducting an independent study at Central Connecticut State University. Next slide. Besides Ragged Mountain, an article on Bakerville Quarry of New Hartford appeared in the 1969-1970 Massachusetts Archaeological Society's journal. The quarry was excavated in the 1960s over a 3-year period by John Neshko. As of 1996, when I went to his home in Burrville, all of the Bakerville Quarry artifacts were well curated in a pile under a pine tree in his backyard. Next slide. So when I went to see him, he just had just a big pile, and I think he had probably his nicer stuff was in the house. So you can see this huge bowl blank he had, and it took him 3 years to loot that site. And then this is only a small fraction of the quarry pics he had. I had pictures of like three of them loaded with just quartzite quarry pics. Next slide, please. The Bristol Quarry is briefly mentioned in articles pertaining to the town's history. All known artifacts from this site are scattered between Yale University, the Norris Bull Collection at UConn, Bristol Historical Society, and Plainville Library. The extensive collection of basalt picks from this quarry are in a private collection located in New Hartford. Next slide. The Beckwith Quarry, located in New Hartford, Connecticut, was dug by collectors many years ago and was also professionally excavated by Central Connecticut State University 1995 Field School. Kenny? But nothing was ever published on the site. Kenny?
Give me a break.
Artifacts from that site are located at Central Connecticut State University, and the private collection is now at UConn. This gentleman here worked for the CIA when he was older, obviously, and he passed away, and I believe the collection is now over at UConn. At least I hope it is anyway. There are rumors that Soapstone Mountain in Somers, Connecticut was the location of an Aboriginal quarry, but no concrete evidence exists to support that information, except for a soapstone bowl from the Bull collection that was found on the south shore of a lake near Thompson, Connecticut. Recently, Ernie Wiegand informed me of the existence of a quarry site in New Canaan, but again, further investigation needs to be conducted to verify the outcropping and its prehistoric use. On the other hand, based on private collections, Harwinton, East Litchfield, and other areas of New Hartford have much evidence that prehistoric quarrying activity existed, but again, there is no documentation. So all these, we know they're out there, but they're in private collections, nobody has written anything about it. So it's definitely an area that needs to be attended to. Next slide. The only information regarding Cotton Hill in New Hartford is William F. Rogers' extensive collection of soapstone vessels, vessel fragments, quarrying tools, and meager dig notes that mentioned his 9 trips to the quarry pit in 1936. All of these artifacts are at the Institute for American Indian Study, and this picture is courtesy of the Institute. Next slide, please. While conducting my research in the late 90s, I was assisted by the late Walt Landgraf. Many of you here today were fortunate enough to have known Walt. From the many years teaching at the regional school in Winsted and through his connections at the Historical Society and the Stone Museum, Walt met many people who shared information with him, including information regarding soapstone bowl collections or the locations of soapstone quarries. Walt never hesitated sharing what he knew with me and other archaeologists. Walt accompanied me on several occasions to museums, historical societies, and libraries across the state, and even to the Southold Indian Museum on Orient Point, Long Island, to view and photograph some exquisite soapstone bowls found in cremation burials. Realizing the importance of preserving archaeological sites, Walt also led many of us on hikes through the Northwest Hills to document and map quarry sites that were either located on private or state property. But most importantly was that one hike up to Ragged Mountain. I don't quite remember the circumstance of why we had gone to the shelter that day, but while we were there, he wanted to show me the spring that was located near the shelter. Next slide. It's a big piece of ledge there, and this water has been constantly flowing, at least for 15 years since I've been known to have seen it. While heading towards the spring, I noticed some moss and lichen-covered steatite, next slide, lichen-covered steatite rocks just barely showing through the forest litter. Next slide. Oh, back, I'm sorry. We tried unsuccessfully to flip them over, but they wouldn't budge. Walt and I began clearing the dirt from around the rocks and discovered that they were not loose rocks at all, but vessel blanks still attached to the parent rock. We uncovered another area of quarrying activity for Ragged Mountain. Concerned that this may have been excavated while Fowler and Neal were there, I contacted Dr. Rouse and asked him exactly where Fowler had dug. He replied that excavations only occurred at the shelter. Yes. So, we were ecstatic. On another occasion, next slide, Walt and I were heading out on the trail from the shelter area, and Walt noticed a tree throw with small pieces of steatite stuck in the roots. After 15 years, that tree throw is still there. We commented to each other that this area must be covered with soapstone, and continued on our way out. From that point until 2011, no further investigation was ever conducted. Next slide, I think. From time to time, between 1996 to 2010, my husband and I would hike up to the shelter and check on the status of the bowls. That is, if we could still remember where they were. Then last summer, when we were heading back from the shelter, I decided to do some more investigating near the tree throw and found larger pieces of soapstone and quartzite flake tools. Then my husband discovered that the larger boulder next to the uprooted tree was soapstone. We pulled back the root mat and uncovered the outline of a bowl in progress. Next slide. Then just below that was another smaller boulder that was in the beginning stages of bowl manufacture. Next slide. No, next slide. That's a cobble about this big, just below. It goes downhill, so I don't know, stuff is everywhere. Then below that one, further down the hill, was a large quartzite cobble that had large flakes taken off of it, one of the probable source rocks for their flake tools. Now when we were out there at field school, Kenny went back there with a couple of students to dig around that. Go back. Slide, Gary. One more time. Where this is, where all the quarrying activity is, if you go a little bit more to the right, about 20, 15 feet, there was a quartzite cobble just sitting on the, was it sitting on the ledge up there? It was like somebody, they were just working it one day and just left, and that's where it sat for thousands of years. These things, I'm not even exactly sure what they are. I still think that they were using they're big plates, maybe to push away the talus as they were, the tailings as they were quarrying away. But all this area around here is all pecked. And I guess at this point we don't, is it still, we thinking it's ledge or is it a rock? We don't know. So now, let's see, next slide. All right, this is below the exposure. See, where it was all moss covered is probably where the dirt, this is all buried under here. So they're still pecking out bowls up in this area. You can see all the peck marks. Next slide. All right, next slide. That's the fragment that was sitting up on the ledge that Kenny and his other students found. Okay. So finally, Kenny Fader came out to look at the site in December. And this past spring, excavations by Central Connecticut State University's field school began at the two new loci at Ragged Mountain. A 20 square meter grid was set up over the area encompassing the bowls and other steatite rocks located in the vicinity. 1 meter units were opened. It wasn't long before we started finding tools and bowls. Just in front of the bowls were a bit of a plateau that at this point appears to be quarry tailings that ranged in size from large chunks to dust. Also, we found bowl fragments in there too, big ones. The area behind the bowls is on an incline where not too many tools were found. Right behind the bowls were tools including a quartzite corner pick. Next slide. Well, anyway, I can get rid of this. So, this is kind of down in the slope, and where these people are working, unfortunately, we had this big, huge pine tree in the way, and these two ladies, they were just working under roots, and they're pulling out artifacts. And if the damn tree wasn't there, we probably had a lot more stuff. And the bowls, I believe, are probably up here, right here. So this is actually going down slope. So all this area here is all soapstone debris. So we have a lot of work ahead of us in 2 years. Hopefully Kenny's going back in 2 years. I was in this area here, and this is where it's like a plateau, and this stuff is just more quarry tailings, all kinds of powdered, and then the lower you go, I'm guessing what's happening is the frost is heaving up the bigger pieces, and all the dust is settling. So it's like talcum powder. And let's see, next slide. Chime in, Kenny, whenever you want. And down below here, down below on the slope, there was this ledge seat. And all below in this area here, all artifacts for working the soapstone bowls were found. And we also have charcoal from that area too. So we've got charcoal from just about all the areas that we were digging, and I'm hoping that this is probably going to be the first of the carbon-14 dates for the steatite quarries, at least for Connecticut anyway. So you can see the huge roots that the ladies were working. How am I doing for time? Next slide. And these are the blanks. See, when Walt and I were up there, we found these, there's another blank here. And all we found was the channeling that was going around, and we didn't dig any further because we didn't want to destroy anything. So, and this all is pecked in this area, and this all is undercut. These balls are huge. They are absolutely massive. And you say to yourself, well, why didn't they continue on? They had gotten to this point, and then they just up and left, never to come back again. And this is where they've been for a couple thousand years now. Next slide. And these are all the quarry all the debris. And again, you can see another. This area here is another bowl, and I think there's more undercutting in the back here. Next slide. So you can see the size of these things. They're huge.
At the far end, there's substantial undercut. You can put your hand about a quarter of the way under that big bowl that's right in the middle. So they had started to undercut, but then I think somebody came up and said, "Hey, we can make pottery." This is heck with that. And everybody went, "Oh."
Yeah, but I'm not so sure that's easy too. I mean, you go through a lot of work and then have it break up in the fire. That's pretty frustrating. Go ahead, next slide. And these are some of the tools that we came. I mean, it was amazing. I think we were down probably about 3 centimeters, and we're still in topsoil. Well, there's not a real lot of topsoil up there, but this stuff is just coming out. I mean, we had so much stuff. Next slide. These are scrapers. Next slide. This scraper was really weird. I don't know a lot about how to make a soapstone bowl, but I think at this point here, this was intentional. And I don't know if they're making it to curve out the rims. I don't know, but this is just a really bizarre kind of. We haven't really sat down and looked at this stuff. Courtside's kind of funny under the microscope. You don't really see a lot of use to it. Next slide. Now, this is a piece of what I was noticing in my unit, and I don't know if anybody noticed it, because I was getting a lot of this debitage, is that these look like this is actually boat-shaped. So this is the flat surface, and this is curved. And we're getting these pry marks. Looks like they were prying it up. It's the only thing I could think of. And then it's all removed in this area. So I don't know if they're working the bowl so that they're chiseling down into it, where they can, and then coming around and then somehow prying it out. I don't know anything about soapstone bowl manufacture. If anybody has any deep ideas, speak up. Next slide. Now, as you can see, this is all debitage. You can see that there's the same patterning of the debris. There's all these like boat-shaped pieces. Next slide. Now this is a corner pick. What? Anybody? Somebody? No? This is a corner pick. This is typical of the picks that you see at quarry sites. And you see them at most of at least the ones that Fowler excavated between Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and even the Connecticut sites have corner picks. I believe what they were doing with this, and when we found the corner pick, it was behind those bowls. And I think what they're doing with it is that they're because the angle, when you get to a certain angle and you're undercutting the bowl, you need this to get that right angle to get underneath it to peck at. You probably get a better swing underneath there to peck the stuff out. Or else you'd have to, huh?
Like 5 minutes.
Oh, next slide. More Courtside fragments. Next slide. I think these are more tools, scrapers. Next slide. And this is one of the blanks that was found in my pit. You see how lovely green stone? I think this has got a lot of serpentine in it. That's why it's got the color green. Next one. And these are picks. They made their picks just about out of everything that they could find that was harder than soapstone. Next slide. And this is, I think, is one of the chisels. Next slide. And this is, Kabul is down below where we were digging. You can see where they had taken off pieces of quartzite for their tools. Next slide. And this is another corner pick, I think, that you got from over at the other, this is at the other locust where that real shallow bowl was being picked up. Next slide. And this was the only point, and unfortunately no base. Did you ever figure out what the,
No, I
no,
didn't.
what the material is? Next
Oh, I
slide.
think it's Hornfels. It's
Is
not
it?
Flint.
No. And this, we believe, might be the inside of Atalatl.
And I'll wait.
Yeah, you can see like there's polishing in this groove area here where they were drilling. Now this is a really tiny piece, tiny. The girl, two of the girls were collecting, the ones with the pine tree, were collecting everything, and I guess thank God they did. This is the $200 pick. Ken. This has got the polish here on the tip that I'm calling a pick, and he was calling it a bowl, but I don't know. Anyway, next slide, and I think that's this is a finished one bowl that is from the Institute for American Indian Study. And this thing is like one of these massive ones like that. So that's the finished product. Next slide. That's it.